Welcome. This is part of the data management module on Canvas. You will watch this video and then you will answer few quiz questions, and you will, if you have any questions, there is a discussion chat. You can ask these questions there. If you have no question, that would be just similar to your exit ticket. Okay, similar instruction. So in this lesson, we will learn this like fair data principle. We will learn like fair data principle. Fair data principle means to make your data findable, accessible, interoperable. I will explain to you this in a few minutes, and reusable. So in this lesson, basically, we will learn like why do we want to make this, like why do we care to make this, and so hopefully by the end of this method, you'll appreciate like why this is important, and you will be able to know like the tools that you would need to make your data fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, and how in your proposal to write a data management plan, and this will be part of your proposal. So you will learn like the component of this data management plan and the tools that are available that can help you to write it. Yeah. So let's just get started. Yeah. So if you are doing a research, when could you consider your research to project to be like completed? So let me show you typically when do we consider our research project to be completed. So typically, like you write your proposal, you conduct the research, you publish the paper, then you're done. Yeah. So that classically what we have been doing. Uh, when you publish the paper, like data and codes used to produce this paper are available on the contact of the corresponding author. So at the end of your publication or your report or whatever, you put like a statement like this. But this there is a shift now, and this is probably will not be acceptable in most journals. So now you conduct your research, you manage your data in a data repository, you annotate your data, you annotate like the analysis steps and the code, you publish the data set, you publish the code, you link the paper and the data set to the code, and then you publish your paper. So now typically most journals now or funding agency, as I will be showing you, would require like this model is no longer acceptable, and this is the current model that we all require, where your data and the codes and all these things that usually we don't are not part of your final product, which is your paper or your manuscript, now they are becoming like main products that you should also show along with your paper. Yeah. So the old mode, you have the paper and you have a statement like this. The new mode is that like you have your paper or your report or your thesis or your project report or whatever, and then you have all this data and codes that you use to reproduce to produce this report, and then you link them together. You put like a link, and I will show you like tools for doing this, like tools for where your data can reside, and tools where you can link your data to your report or your paper. Okay. So this article actually was published in Scientific Data, and it since its publication it gains a lot of attention, like this article of like fair guiding principle in scientific data management and stewardship. So I will hopefully try to convince you why this is important. It's not just like a requirement to satisfy like your funding agency or the publisher, but why this is can be very useful for you and for your group and for the scientific community in general. Yeah. The first part, or before I convince you like how this is useful, let me just provide like some quick overview on the FAIR principle. FAIR means like F stands for findable, make your data findable, and to make your data findable, remember when you were looking at reviewing papers for your proposal, these papers used to have like DOI. So this is like a permanent address for this work, for this report, or for this paper. If you looked at the authors details like name and affiliation and things like this, you might find that after the author there is like this green sign that say like ORCID, connecting research. So that is the researcher ID. So this is like a unique number for like that researcher, or for each researcher in these papers. So basically you have a permanent address for the paper, and then you have like a unique ID for each researcher to be able to identify this researcher and his work. Accessible, this is all like this repository that you find online, where you find all this data and codes are shared, and we will go in details about like this repository, and not in details, but I will provide like an overview about like this repository and which one would be suitable for which type project. Yeah. Interoperable means that you use some general convention so that your data could be understood by human and machine like in your field. So that is what interoperable means. Reusable is that, for example, like you should provide like a license for your data so that like other people can use it, but also for your data to be reusable, it should have like sufficient information and details. So here, this is the license. It should have like sufficient information and details so that the reader will understand what is this data about, so that they can reuse it. Yeah, including your code and things like this. And tools for this is like Jupyter, for example, and we will talk about this. Yeah. Okay. So FAIR data in a nutshell. So this is a cutting-edge topic and an important development in research worldwide, because this can improve. For example, I mean, it has so many advantages, but one of the advantage is that it can improve like the transparency of your research. Remember when we were talking about like ethical issues and how a lot of fabrication or falsification could happen? If you are following a FAIR data principle, that could prevent this to some extent. But there are so many other advantages that I will be like listing shortly. To be fair in your data, so you need to have a data management plan, because if your data is at a mess and is disorganized, then you cannot really be fair. You cannot make it reusable, for example, or accessible. Like the accessibility of the data will not be as good, because you cannot have some keywords make your data like findable and accessible. Yeah, so the findability, I mean, not the accessibility. Okay. So you need to manage your data, like to have like your data need to be well organized and well managed, and this is what we will be talking about, like how to make your data organized and managed. Yeah? All data must be managed, but not all data need to be open. So that is also another misconception about FAIR data principle. Some people think, okay, like I have to share all my data. No, because sometimes you have confidential data or data that have like the access to this data have certain privileges. So and there are, so try to make your data as open as possible and as closed as necessary. Okay, so if you have confidential data, for example, I was working in a project in Hawaii, and we were trying to find the optimal pumping for some of the public well. The location of this well, this is confidential information. But how could I share my model uh, and my solution giving this confidential information? There are ways to do this, yeah. So there are ways to do this. Basically, you can just like change the coordinates, yeah. It will not affect like you don't need to give the precise location. You can just change the location of this pumping well and without and this will not affect what you are doing, what you are showing, the content or like the significance of your work, but it will keep the confidentiality of the work. FAIR is not like a compliance check for your funding agency or like your publisher, but it is like a new culture where we make everything like we make our data and our codes available for others to use, and which can, for example, like if I have a paper and I'm showing some result, and with this result I'm showing like the codes that I use to produce these results. I'm showing the codes that I'm used to reproduce this figure. This will make my article, my paper more attractive for the reader because they can reuse these codes to reproduce these results or to produce similar result or figures. Yeah. And it's also for the stakeholders because I publish something, all my data and my codes and my models are available online. So the stakeholder, if they want to use these codes, the codes are available, the data are available, so they can make use of it. Not only like the data should be like available for stakeholder, but actually stakeholder should be actively participating in defining data management and data sharing. So that is also something you need to keep in mind, that if you are working on a project with a stakeholder, you need to engage them when you are developing your data management plan, yeah, so that they will tell you about their needs and then you can plan accordingly. Okay, so now why to be fair or use like this fair guiding principle for my average research? Well, one general reason is like to satisfy the editorial and funding agency requirements. Yep. I mean, that's the most obvious reason because for most like high quality journals, you cannot publish your work now with, as I showed you earlier, like data are available upon contacting the corresponding author. You need to say data is available at this link and you provide the link. Codes and this data is by data, but I mean like the data that includes the codes and the models that you use to reproduce these results. Yeah. If you are not doing modeling work, if you are doing lab work, that would include also the codes that you use for like statistical analysis and the data that collected from your experiment, like raw data, and all additional like details about the methods that were not included in the report or the paper. That would be also part of the data of this data sharing. Yeah. So I want you to, for each of these one, like for the researcher, for the research lab, for your colleague, for the science community and the broad community, I want you to think just for each of these, like just find like one reason why being fair would be useful. So just pause this video and just think about these categories, and for each one try to just find one reason why data would be useful. Okay, so for researcher, why fair would be useful, think about it, like how many times you came to a previous work that you did because you want to reuse it again or you want to have a look at it again, and then you start looking at this work and maybe you didn't find it, you put it on some hard disk that you cannot access anymore, or you don't even know where it is, or it has so many files. Yeah, even worse, like you were able to find it but you start looking at your data and the code and they are not well described, they are not well annotated, so you look at this, oh what is this, what does this mean, I mean you don't understand it. Yeah. So basically being fair, by not annotating your data, by not putting the data in somewhere for easy access, you could regret this because you will say, okay, now I don't understand what I did or I lost this data. Okay, so that's one reason. Yeah. So basically the one who will benefit more from data being fair is you. You are the first one who will benefit from this. For example, like I have my previous goals, I want to use them in another project, or I want to give them to like student to use like another project, I just give them a link. They go there, they found the data, they found everything well annotated, well described. They don't have to come back to me and ask me question, what does this mean, how to do this. Everything is there, everything is well documented, and everything is well described. And I will show you an example in a few minutes. Yeah. Another thing is like loss in trust if data is not fair. So like other researchers not gonna trust what you're doing if you're not fair. Like you publish something and maybe somebody has suspicion that you did some cheating or falsification or fabrication, yeah? And then your data is not available, it's not accessible. So people will, your fellow colleagues will like lose trust in you. And basically if you are not doing like reproducible science, you are not doing science at all. Like and there are some journals that will just publish anything, yeah, and they will not require your data or anything, and you can find researcher who will like fabricate or falsify data. Yeah, but so if you're publishing in this type of journals and you are not making your data available, then people will that will could hurt your reputation, basically. Yeah. But another advantage is that like you can make data first class research output. So some journal, for example, like Elsevier, for example, they have like you publish your main article. With this main article, you can publish 2 additional articles. You can publish 1 article like data in brief, where you like that will be another article. So like you have your main article, the data in brief, that will you can annotate your data and describe your data in details and how it was collected, what does it mean, everything about your data. That could be an article that you publish with your main article. And then method X article, that would be another article, another paper that you publish, which will describe your method in detail and will show other figure and other intermediate steps that will not show in the main article. So that could be also another advantage to you. Yeah. This project, for example, they are developing data metric for data research and impact. Yeah. For the research lab, data management is a gateway for data sharing. So if you are sharing your data, this means that your data is well organized, which means that like the member of your research lab will be very happy because your data is very organized, they can use it. When they need access to it, they can easily find access to it and they can easily use it. Yeah. Another reason, especially for like boss, uh, your boss, is that like you get a student or you get a postdoc, and then you invest a lot of intellectual investment in that student and that postdoc to develop a method, for example, a method for calibrating an equipment, a method for doing certain water quality tests, a method for doing certain field work, and that student leave and that this data is not well documented, versus, as I will show you like some tools, if this data is well documented, available, accessible, then this investment, you don't have to like reinvent the wheel. Like when a new student comes, he wants to do this work again, he does not have to start from the beginning, he just continues the work of the previous student. Yeah? For your colleague, you can discuss and like, for example, like what I did before, like I will develop something like I'm developing a code for something. So I will develop this using something called like a Jupyter notebook. I will talk about this in a minute and I will show you an example. In this Jupyter notebook, I will write all the information, not just the code, but like all the information, and then I will have the code, it will reproduce some figure, and then when we are having like a research talk, when we are having like a research discussion in this meeting, I'll I'll come to the meeting with this. Actually, I will not come to the meeting because this code would be available like online on GitHub or whatever. So like I will just like get a link, open these notebooks, and then we can have our discussion from there. Yeah? And then well managed and well annotated data, this will improve engagement. This is from my own experience. When I have this notebooks and then we have a discussion with all the details are there, with everything is clear, that could improve engagement, because if they are uncertain about something, they start asking questions, they start engaging, and then we have the code, we have the text that goes with it, and then we can change and play with it until we get to what we want. For the scientific community, it like enable like data to be reused by human and machine. It could improve collaboration. More people, of course, will cite you because like your work can be easily reproduced. They have these codes, they can redo. Like they read about a method, but now they know how to do because you provided the code with it. So it's like they read it, they learn it, and now they know how to do it. But also it could increase collaboration. Like I get emails from different researchers asking me about like my work and asking for collaboration and asking me question about my code, like how did you do this, like this part was not clear, or this part could you provide more explanation, or so I get several emails about my work, and that could like increase like collaboration with researchers. And then for the broad community, this data can be impactful and used by the stakeholder. Okay. So let's look here at these four guiding principles. So to make your data findable, it has to be well annotated with rich metadata, increase the findability by human and the machines. Like the more details there, the more annotations, the more metadata there. Again, like you're searching for something on Google, it is more likely that you will find something that has more details and more metadata and more annotated than something like a figure, for example, or a code that just has one line and you don't know what this code is doing. But if your code is well annotated and your data is well annotated, it's more likely that this data will be more findable. And then it should be discoverable via persistent identifier, like DOI. And I will talk about this here. And on public repository. Yeah. So the data to be findable, it should be also on the public repository, not on your hard drive. Yeah. Or if it's in your hard drive should be connected to the internet. But this is not a good idea. Yeah. It should be based on like one of the trustworthy repository on the internet. Accessible, for the data to be accessible, it have to be on one of these repository, and which would allow and this repository, like a trustworthy repository, will generally like have a contingent plan to make like metadata accessible even the original data is no longer available. Like metadata that could be include like, for example, like the author names, their affiliation, some abstract, and the metadata of your data, like the description of your data itself, even if the data, like the data files are not there. Like let's say you have like terabytes of data that are reproduced by your model, but all the description of this data, like the metadata, that could be available even if this original data is lost. And then the data should be able, you should be able to like download this data or manipulate it like using cloud computing by human and by machine. Interoperable means like you observe like the community format, standard, and vocabularies. And if you are using the commonly used format, standard, and vocabulary, that will make your data interoperable by human and by machine. Reusable, that would, you should provide like a clear through usage license. You should provide the usage license, like, because if this data does not have a license, I don't know if I can use it or not. But if it has a clear usage license, then it can be reusable. But also, it should be contextual documentation, like rich information and rich annotation to understand like how, why, and when, and by whom this data is created, and like how to reuse it. Yeah. So basically here, like to make your data findable, you need like metadata. For accessible and interoperable, this you need community infrastructure like repository, like common vocabulary and standards and formats. And for reusable, like you need policy and documentation. Yeah. Okay. Well, basically, this is a summary of this article. Okay, so let's look at some example for each. So to make your data findable, what are the tools that... I'm not going to read this. I mean, you can just read this on your own. So basically, this is just copy and paste it, summarize it actually from this article. But I will talk more about the practical issue, like how to make your data findable. So to make your data findable, you need like a persistent identifiers. So some of the persistent identifiers, that would be digital object identifier, DOI. And you've seen this DOI like in these manuscript these papers that you were reviewing, like they have like a DOI. So what, like now, let me ask you a question. What is the difference between a DOI, digital object identifier, and URL? URL like a web address or something. What's the difference? Can you tell? URL like a web address. Yeah. What's the difference? A digital... Okay, let me tell you the difference. A digital object and identifier this is a permanent identifier for this object. Like a URL, that's an address. So the address, like you have an article that's available on the internet at this address. Now, maybe this URL will break. Maybe the article will change its address on the internet. Yep. But the DOI, that is a unique identifier for this article. So if this article, let's say in 100 years from now, there is no more internet. The internet is not there. The information of this article will remain. So the information that will be like the title, the author name, where it was published, the journal name, the issue name, the abstract. So all these information would remain even if like there is no internet. But DOI could be also used as a persistent link to these resources. So let's say like you have an article, and this article changed its address. If you have a URL, you will not be able to access it. If you have a DOI, you can still access it, regardless of its URL address. Yeah. Okay, so that's like a digital object identifier. Uniform resources identifier. So the uniform resources identifier, this is like similar to like a DOI, but it does not provide way to access it directly. So the DOI, it serves as like an identifier and an address for this article, but the uniform resource identifier, that will retain the metadata for your article, but will not give you like direct access, like direct link to this article. Like example for URN would be like ISBN number for books. So each book, for example, will have like, this book has an ISBN number of 78, I don't know, 3 dash blah blah blah. So if you have this ISBN, then you can gain information about this book, like the title of the book, the author of the book, the publisher, the year it was published, and so on. Now that's with like digital data, but what if digital data and like URN that could not necessary for digital data, like if you had a book imprint that is not in a digital format, you can have a URN for it. Yeah? That's again unique number that's only issued for this book. By the way, like Zenodo, like if you have like your research paper, for example, that you produce, you want to have a DOI for it, that's where you can get it. Like, so if you go to Zenodo, this can issue a DOI for like your document, your like the research paper, for example, that you are submitting to this class. I mean, you don't have to, but if you want to, you can use Zenodo to produce a DOI for your document. Yeah. Let's say you're not working with a digital object. Like, let's say you're working with an actual sample, like here, like this soil sample or whatever. For this one, there is International Generic Sample Number. So again, this is the IGSN, the International Generic Sample Number. And again, you will have this unique number, unique identifier for this sample, so that like you would retain information about this sample. ORCD, Open Researcher and Contributor Identifier. So this would be like, let me just show you, for example, I can show you like an example of my, here, like, let me show, I can show you an example. So here, for example, like this is my website. You can see my website here. And I put here my ORC ID. So somebody clicked here, he will find like information about me, like the employment, for example, like education and qualification, research, resources, some of my published works. I have like published work. You can also find some information about like my funding, research funding. So basically this again would, if I have this number, like this website may fall, I might not maintain it, this company could close their server or whatever, but this information, these are persistent identifiers. So if you have like this identifier, like this information would be retained even if there's no internet. Okay. Research activity identifier, again, I'm not gonna go in details, but this is like if you have a project, then you can have an identifier of this project. So all the products of this project will fall under this identifier. Research resource identifier, like if you have a certain research resources that you want to identify, then that would be the research resource. For example, like a code, a software, some genes that you identified or developed, or some, I don't know, vaccine for COVID or whatever, then you want to give it like a specific like research resource identifier. That would be this one. Okay. So that is how to make your data findable, by, so in a nutshell, how to make your data findable by making a persistent identifier. How to make your data accessible? You need to not keep it on like your hard drive or on your computer, but you need to make it available on some trustworthy, accessible repository. That could be like the funder and institutional repository, like an FGCU, like if they have like a repository, for example, or the funding agencies, they could have a repository where they tell you put your data here. Yeah, but there could be some other general repository. So these are example of some other general repository where your data can reside. This is like an example of one of them, Open Science Framework. So let me show you this one. So here, this is like Open Science Framework. Remember when I was telling you, like if you are managing a lab and you have a student and postdoc working there, and then you want to have, for example, like they are working on developing certain methods, they are working in developing certain protocols, and you want these to be available for other students to use. That could be like a good place where you could maintain, like you can watch this video here to learn more about it. But could be a good place where you could maintain your work. So let me just show you some example of. So here you see these are an example of somebody who have. So you see, like this could be like your lab page, and the student could add like their information here. So here, for example, this would be some metadata. This would be like some file. I mean, they are not sharing any file. You can have like a Wikipedia article to like describe what you are doing like in details and so on and so forth. So basically, this is where the student, instead of like, that could be like their research notebook. Like instead of having like, right, like that would be like their online like research notebook where they will put all these details to be accessible for other students. So that's like an example of this one. Okay, there are so many of them. If you check this link, this will tell you like a comparison of different of them. There could be disciplinary repository. So for example, like in water resources, we have HydroShare. If you go to this, you'll find a lot of very interesting data, very interesting models, very interesting resource that you can use for your research and for education purposes. This is like in your HydroShare. And again, if somebody wants to use your data, then you just give him the DOI for your HydroShare, or just the URL, or like DOI, if you have like DOI from Zenodo, and then they go there and then they will find like your data. There could be like national or regional repository. So here, for example, in Florida, we have the Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative, the GRID-C. So this is a repository for research that is done on the Gulf of Mexico. So like if you are interested in this region, you'll find a lot of interesting research about water resources, about the ocean, about ecology, about like all these like natural science research in the Gulf of Mexico. You'll find this data there. So for example, like we are currently working on a project manuscript about like red tide and its impact on human health effect, and the codes and the data that we collected and produced for this research, we are putting it there, and we are submitting this before we submit this manuscript to one journal. Yeah. Here again, if you want to learn more about this national or regional repositories, this is a database that has a lot of them, and you can search ones that suits you more. There are accessible and interactive repositories. So this is just like repository where your data will reside, but there are other repository where your not only your data will reside, but you can even just start playing with this data, like on the cloud, yeah, online. So this, for example, like if you have a GitHub and with Google Drive and Colab, for example, you can have something like this. Let me show you an example. So you see here, for example, like you see here, like this is my GitHub repository. Here I'm describing like what I'm like, what what this repository contain. So for example, like if you go here and then you open uh, this notebook and then you open it in Colab, you can basically like run this code and start like interacting with it. Yeah. So basically it tells you like the physical phenomena figure, so this is blah blah blah, and this is like you run this code and this is some parameter you can change. So you see here like all the figures that like were produced, and uh, the code that come with it. So this code is runnable. Like I don't want to run it now because I could. It's not important for this, but basically this code like you can run, and so this is for example here. This is you can find some more codes here. Like this is subset selection code. So you see here like I'm putting this image to describe what this here. This sees a lot of rich metadata. So this called like metadata, a lot of rich metadata where I'm describing the input data in detail. So like if you read something like this, then you will know what does it mean. Then this is the output of this. So this is for example like the models that I'm using for this study. Again, a lot of more description of everything. Everything is very transparent, very well described, so that like the author will, if they want to reproduce this research, use the methods that I presented in this manuscript and understand like every step I did and every figure and how I produce each and every of these figure. Then they can read, like student, like for example, like I want to continue this work and I want to give this to a student or postdoc. He doesn't need me. He can just like go through this and he will find like all the details that he would need. Yeah. And again, like these are available online. Like I didn't open any hard disk. I just give you the link and then you use it. Yeah. Okay. So you see like here how I made my data and research accessible. Interoperable, as I said, like you use a common format. For example, like you use like if you have like spreadsheet data, you CSV, you use like GRS, like shapefile format, like commonly used formats that we are used to. Like these details, like interoperable, might not be very important to you, but again, and then you use common vocabulary. Like for example, like in climate forecast metadata convention, like so they have a common vocabulary. So if you want to develop an Earth system model, which you're not going to do, but I'm just giving you this as an example, then you should stick to the common vocabulary that they are using. So like if you click on this link, for example, you will see here very detailed like information about like how, like what common vocabulary and naming convention and variable names that you should use, like very detailed information for the common vocabulary. Again, this is not very relevant for this class, but I'm just giving you this as a general information. Like for example, let me just see. So this is the conviction, latest release. This would be conviction. Yeah, but anyway, I just want to show you like how detailed this could be and how they could, like standard names, for example. So this is a standard name. So let me just show you an example, like sea surface, sorry, height above, for example, like JU, sea surface height. Okay, sea surface height above JID. So you see here, they have like, so if you, this is one of the variable in your model, They have a very clear description so that when you make your model to be standard, why do you want your model to be standard? So that it would be interoperable, like other machine could find it and use it, or other human could find it and use it. Yeah. So, but again, like these details are advanced details, they are not very important for you, but I'm just showing them to you for your information. Same like with groundwater, like if you are doing some groundwater work, you should stick to this groundwater convention. Like, for example, like I'm defining hydraulic head. It has a specific definition that I need to stick to with certain references and so on and so forth. You can check this here. Yeah, I'm not gonna go through it, but like I'm just giving you this as an example. Yeah. Now, last thing is like a reusable, and I'm sure you have seen this on the internet before. Like reusable, basically, like to make your data reusable, it should be very well annotated, because if I can understand something, then I can reuse it. But it should also have a license that comes with it. So these are example of license that could be provided. So this from the most open to the least open. So the most open is like a public domain, like you find like this sign here, and you find like a license that looks like this. So that would be the license, and this means that you can just use this data and you don't need to provide credit for me, the author of this data. You can find like CC, like Creative Commons. So this will be CC, like Creative Commons 0. The most common one is Creative Commons by. So basically attribution. You just need to provide credit. Like, so you use my data, use my code, but then you acknowledge that this code was produced by so and so. Yeah. Then if you want to be like by and SA means share alike. Share alike means that you are not allowed to change the license. So I have this under certain license. You can, if you want, you can reuse my data, but you're not allowed to change the license. You can have by and ND. ND means like derivative works, means no modification is allowed. Like if you want to use data or this code, just use it as is. Yeah. And so on and so forth. Like you can have. So basically, these are the. This one is also important. Like by and NC non-commercial. Non-commercial means that you cannot take my data and my code and use it commercially. So for example, I developed a model ground code that can model groundwater or whatever. You cannot, for example, take my model or my code, make a graphical user interface and start selling it for, I don't know, $10,000 or whatever. Yeah. So that would be like NC, non-commercial. Like you can use it, but not for non-commercial use. If you want to make a graphical user interface, you can make it, but you make it available for free. Yeah. Typically, you will like use this CC by, unless you have a strong reason to do any of these other licenses. Okay, so now last part is like how to be fair. Okay, so now we learn it, like what is fair and why is it important to be fair. Like, but how to be fair? Like, to be fair, like you need to have your data to be well managed, to manage your data, develop and implement a research and data management plan. So that's the first step. Like before you do the work, you develop like a data management plan. This is how I will manage my data. This is the data that I will produce. This is the format that it will be in. This is how I will like up repository where I will continuously be updating the output of my data, or like the methods that I develop or whatever. Yeah. And then you start like sharing your data using this guiding principle. So I want you to pause this video, okay? And after you pause this video, you scan this code, and then there is a data management plan quiz. Do the quiz. After you do the quiz, take a screenshot, because you will upload this screenshot on Canvas. And if this like to get like your participation grade. So like the last quiz question would be, you will upload this screenshot, and that would be like part of your participation grade. So do this, and then you will know at what like well, you will know whether you are good at managing your data or you're not good at managing your data. So I'm not gonna read this slide like in details, I will just give you an example, like planning your project. So this is ad hoc, this is one time, active and informative, and this is optimal for you. So when it comes to my data, I have way of doing things, but no standard or documented plan. I don't have a data management plan. Versus this one, I have created plans for managing my data that are designed to streamline its future use by myself and others. Something like this. And then everything in between. And so, okay, so you do this, and then you do your activity on Canvas. Okay. So now this is for your project, for your class project. What for your class proposal, like for the proposal for this course, I want you to provide like a data management plan, and it's simple, like just. And I will show you like the format and like the structure of this data management plan. And I would like your data management plan to follow the NSF data management plan requirements. So you can choose for either like the engineering directorate or the geoscience directorate, depending on what you are interested in or what you're doing, or other directorate, like if you are computer science or whatever. Yeah. So this is the NSF data sharing policy. Investigators are expected to share like their data, the primary data sample, physical collection, and other supporting material created and gathered through the course of the work. Proposal must include a supplementary document no more than 2 pages labeled data management plan. So I expect from you also to have, doesn't need to be 2 pages, like even half a page is enough. I just want you to just get started thinking in this way. Yeah. So what would be like the plan with like the ingredient, or what would this plan include, like the type of data, so the samples, physical collection, software, curriculum material, and other material to be produced in the course of the project. So you basically type what type of data, like I will be doing survey, I will be developing a code, I will be using this model to develop this design. Okay, so the type of data, I will be collecting samples. Yeah, so the type of data that would be there. Standard for data and metadata. So if this data, like for example, I will be collecting, I will be interviewing, conducting an interview, and this interview will be saved as CSV file. The interview result would be saved as CSV file. Or I will be doing some GIS work, and that would be like saved as shapefile. Or I will be doing some modeling work, and this will produce some mud flow files, and there will be standard mud flow files. Yeah. Again, like the standard and metadata, this has to do with Finable. Yeah. This has to do with Interoperable, and this has to do with Reusable. Yeah. Policy for access and sharing. So I will include provision for appropriate, like if they have any privacy issue, confidentiality issues. So for example, like you are doing some interview and has some confidentiality issues, that needs to be mentioned. Yeah. Security issue, intellectual property, or other right. Yeah. This has to do with accessibility and reusability. Yeah. Policy and provision for reuse, like redistribution and production, or of derivatives. This again has to do with accessibility and reusability. And plan for data archiving, sample, and other research product for preservation and access to them. And this has to do with Findable and Accessible. So for example, standard for data and metadata, I will like open Geospatial Consortium, for example. Like, again, you don't need to put this data, but this is just like for information. Yeah. To make like my data like accessible and findable, for example, I can use like GitHub, and to make my data findable, I can use DOI or use this one. To provide license, this is an example of a license that I will provide. Yeah? I will Creative Commons. For example, here this is by, this is non-commercial, and this you cannot change this license. This HydroShare would be an example of repository, like to make my data accessible. I would use HydroShare where my data will reside. Okay. So for the engineering directive of the NSF, for example, this is the same here. Yeah, this is basically the same here. This is like the example of the data management plan. It should include like these things, and if you click here, it basically provide you information about each one. So like product of research, like you should basically be able to answer this question. Data format and standard, you should be basically able to answer this question. Again, I'm not gonna read this in detail because that will be like boring, but like when you prepare your data management plan, you should like read this question and try to answer them. Dissemination, access, and sharing of data. Again, you read this question and try to answer them. Yeah. Okay. To write a data management plan, there are some tools online. Like this is like an example of one of them. Like this is like an example of this tool. Let me try to get it here. Data management plan tool.org. It's tool.org, and basically it will help you to write the data management plan according to the funding agency requirement. And I provide on Canvas, like if you check like on Canvas, I provided examples of some data management plans that I developed like using this tool. Yeah, so you can check this on Canvas. For sample, I provided like a sample where I developed like a data management for the Geoscience Directorate and one for the Engineering Directorate for the same project. Yeah. Okay. So closing remark. FAIR is consistent approach to keep my data organized and reusable when I'm not present. Make data as open as possible and as close as necessary to benefit the research community and stakeholder. FAIR is not a checklist for compliance, but a change in research culture and will be mandatory by funding agency in the future. So it's now mandatory by NIH and NSF, for example. And it's mandatory also by most high quality journals. Actually, I was reviewing an article and I recommended this article to be rejected for one journal, although they didn't have this policy in place yet, because I felt that there was something fishy about like how this result was provided, and the author was not very transparent about like the data sharing. So I just recommend, I said like the article is sound based on like the intellectual merit of the article. It can be accepted, but I have these concerns, and based on this concern, it's up to you whether you want to accept it or reject it. I mean, I didn't recommend it to be rejected, but I communicated my concern very openly. Yeah? And actually the editor took my concern and the article like accounted for my respected like my opinion, and it was rejected. While you have well organized and document your data, the rest, while you have to well organize and document your data, like all you have to do is that you just well organize and document your data. The rest is available for you, like repository, persistent identifier, license. All these infrastructure are available to you. FAIR increase credibility, your credibility as a researcher. People like they see that what you're doing is very open. You're not hiding anything. That will increase your credibility. and it will also increase your citation, because like somebody read the method you develop and said, wow, this is a cool method, but I don't know how to develop it. Now you know how to develop it because I provided the code with very well annotation and details, so that other people can just use my method and use it in the research. Yeah, and it benefits like research community and stakeholders. Yeah. So here I'm putting like all these additional resources. So I use these resources to prepare these slides, but they also have additional information, very rich information that you can use. So here's more resources, and here's more additional resources, and then there are also some additional slides that you could look at. So these are some additional slides if you are also interested. And that's it. And please answer the quiz on Canvas. And so like two things to do, like to do the quiz, that's number one, quiz questions. Number two, do the discussion. Like if you have a question to ask it. If you don't have any question to ask, that will be similar to the exit ticket. Yeah, same guideline and instruction. Okay, thanks for watching, and see you in the next lesson.